Okay. I think we're live now. Hello, everyone. Welcome to one more session. This time we are in Singapore, right?
Yes, in Singapore.
Like, yes. Our speaker for this time is Zoe. Zoe is from Vietnam, but is a product design based in Singapore. She is mostly interested in interconnected. I can't pronounce this word. Interconnectedness of
Fitness.
systems and how they behave. Yeah. And simplicity and beauty of the web, and spend most of her time figuring out how to build an environment where people are happy, personable, and collaborative. Zoe, is here. She's here to deliver a presentation to you all. As I said, we have few people in the room. They're gonna probably join in the next minutes. But you guys who are here will have the privilege to see Zoe doing introduction. So go ahead, Zoe.
Thank you so much. It's really kind of you. Let me share my screen really quickly. All right, you can see my screen.
Yes, yes.
All right, awesome. So, hi everyone. I'm Zoe, a Vietnamese product design lead based in Singapore. And though at this juncture, I'm not so much of a design lead of anything since I'm on a 6-month long sabbatical. So today I want to talk to you about something I've been spending the first part of this very privileged break thinking about, which is how to live and work in the multicultural and connected world today and also to thrive in it. So before we begin, I'd like to ask if anyone has eaten. You can give the answer in the comment in the chat or just make a mental note of your answer might be. So this is probably the most asked question from my mom whenever I call her or when I'm in Vietnam and coming home from one of my little adventures in Hanoi. So in Vietnam, asking someone whether they have eaten or if they had eaten rice is a form of greeting. This also happens to be pretty common in Asia and Singapore, China, India as a way to greet, and especially when a guest comes to your house. Have you eaten is so ubiquitous that Rice Studios, which is a branding agency in Vietnam, has created this wonderful takeaway container for Bay Min, which is a local food delivery company that plays around with not just this question, but also the grammar of the Vietnamese language. If you switch up the orders of the words, it still makes sense with just slightly different meaning. There are many theories about the origin of this question, from a genuine concern about starvation or malnutrition in times of war, famine, recession, to the recent millennials, food means care and love and community. So whatever the origin, it's a shared cultural artifact, especially in some parts of Asia and the Asian diaspora. This made me wonder if there are any other ways of greeting that didn't translate directly into hello in other cultures and languages. And of course, there are. If literally translated into English like what I've done here, these phrases bear vastly different literal meanings than a simple hello, sometimes with really beautiful meanings. If you had listened to these greetings being translated into English without understanding their meaning in a given context, you would probably feel mostly intrigued and sometimes don't know the appropriate responses to them. So constantly asking someone if they have eaten might be seen as being nosy if you're not from my particular culture. Explaining in details what you've just eaten might come off as rather weird in contexts where people just want to say hi. Something as simple a cultural artifact as a greeting already carries so many nuances. What are other aspects of a culture might we interact with when we work with folks different from us, especially in the context of an organization or a team? So Hofstede, a Dutch social psychologist well known for his pioneering research in cross-cultural groups and organizations, provide a shorthand definition of culture as the collective programming of the mind or the software of the mind that distinguishes members of one group or category of people from others. It is a collective phenomenon, which means that it exists in groups of people, for example, in tribes or ethnic groups, in nations, and of course in organizations. Let's look at an example. Here's baby me on a siglo. Baby me is Vietnamese, which means that I most likely will inherit some national Vietnamese cultural traits. I am of King ethnic group in Vietnam. I speak the dominant Vietnamese language. I'm from Hanoi, with a Hanoian accent from the northern part of Vietnam. These are the cultural artifacts of being born where I was born. Northerners are also typically seen as more conservative and less friendly than folks from the South, which might be true for baby me for a time. You can look at that, not really a smile in the photo. I also moved to Singapore around 13 years ago and I'm working here. So many of the organizational cultural practices that I've learned it mostly in a Singapore environment. In Singapore, there's an emphasis on promptness and good organization over flexibility, while in Vietnam, fluidity might be favored. Singapore is also a multicultural environment with policies that are very friendly to multinational corporations and startups, which means that I've also worked in international environment with more flat hierarchy rather than hierarchical structures. I, for one, thrive in an environment that provides autonomy versus an environment that requires authority, for example. These are the behavioral patterns I've learned. I am also a woman. My social roles include daughter, sister, and recently wife. And at work, I am a design lead. Outside of work, I'm a community lead in Singapore where I feel local, but not native in. So there are many different cultures from different social spheres, national to regional to organizational, intersecting and shaping the way I communicate, interpret, and understand what is the norm and the appropriate way to behave in a given situation. When you interact with me, you will be interacting with these different collective cultures that I inherit. But not only collective and sometimes intersecting, culture is also multi-layered. Shine's organizational culture model, for example, looks at the three layers of cultures. So when we experience a culture, we often experience it from outside in, from the outermost layer or the most visible aspect of a culture, for example, my accent, the way I dress, the greetings I use, to the more hidden layers of espoused values or my beliefs about what is right or wrong. For example, what I mentioned earlier about proudness and organization, and lastly, the innermost layer, or the often taken for granted as truth logic, the moral sentiments, which is often implicit and hard to articulate. For example, being late is a show of disrespect, for example. Culture also changes over time. Vietnam was a matriarchal society with many female heroes in our history, like Ba Chiu, a heroine depicted in the traditional painting in this photo, then became a more patriarchal society with influences from Confucianism from China. And then after the Vietnam War, started implementing more gender equality policies. With recent years, there are many more women in leadership positions in corporations here, though more work still needs to be done, of course. All of this is to say that there are myriad layers and cultures that we are going to interact with when we meet different people. And when embedded in multicultural teams, we're bound to run into challenges. You might find yourself caught in a misunderstanding or suffer from ineffective communication. You might face language barrier or something you say might be misinterpreted. But especially and perhaps more unfortunately, when there's language and meaning barrier, certain groups may become muted into not contributing their much needed insights into the conversation. You might also face the challenge of different working styles, expectations, and motivations. In Vietnam, there's a preference for consensual decision making where group harmony is prioritized, while in Singapore, it leans towards a more top down approach. When these working styles meet, it might result in conflicts over what's the standard operational processes and expectations. And last but not least, an intolerance towards differences and a lack of understanding when it comes to diversity. The unawareness of differences can lead to intolerance towards people when they don't work the same way that we do, and hence conflicts. Despite all the challenges, though, there are tremendous business values for ethnic and culturally diverse teams. McKinsey ran a research across multiple industries in Canada, Latin America, the United Kingdom, and the United States, and the findings were clear. Companies in the top quartile for ethnic and cultural diversity were 33% more likely to outperform on profitability than companies in the fourth quartile. Apart from business values, there are also organizational values, interpersonal, personal values in working in culturally diverse teams and across borders. You get to meet people and learn from different cultures. Teams with locals provide valuable local insights, diverse perspectives, and the challenging of assumptions also equals opportunities for innovation. And of course, there is trying all the wonderful food around the world. So, how do we reap the benefits and opportunities while dealing with a multitude of challenges interacting with the complexity of cultures? In the opening of the Politics of Design book, which happens to be one of my most recent favorites, Reuben Patter highlighted the challenges of the increasingly connected world, which can lead to miscommunication and conflict. He says, attributing this error to the assumption that people will understand us because we are universal or objective in our communication, in our designs. So I think we need to start there with the awareness that our worldview isn't the only worldview and our assumptions aren't the default. There are bound to be differences, but to even begin to learn how to navigate this multicultural world is so important to see this world as a multiverse made up of many worlds instead of one. And we will not judge others with ourselves as the benchmark. But I also thought we could go a step further and not just start with awareness of differences, but with respect. The dictionary defines respect as a feeling of deep admiration for someone or something elicited by their abilities, qualities, or achievements. But looking at the inventions that advance humanity in the world, knowing that we are where we are, because the compass was first invented in China, concrete by people from Syria and northern Jordan, satellite from Russia and the US, I think we can redefine respect in the multicultural context. Working in multicultural teams, the new assumption perhaps could be that we all have something admirable to offer precisely not despite, but precisely because we are different, whether or not we have heard of their track record. For someone coming from a country and region with a long history of colonialism, it is equally important for me to look inward. The respect afforded to certain other cultures can sometimes cloud the respect for my own culture. Xenophilia was a thing going up, and perhaps still is, with literature, media, organizational, and design practices still deeply rooted in the West. I've spent the last 13 years in an Asian, but also largely Westernized environment, and I've gained so much, but also have unfortunately lost connections to a large part of my Vietnamese root and culture, from the close-knit relationship between neighbors and at work to the appreciation for the intricacy and brilliance of crafts like Denku, as seen in this photo here, a mid-autumn traditional kids' toy in Vietnam. What makes it less of a designed object? Ultimately, it means that I have forgotten also the appreciation for what my own culture can bring to an international environment. And if you haven't noticed, I also have a westernized name, which I got when I moved here so as to fit in. And unfortunately, it has stuck until now. Anushka Kandola, in her article, What Does It Mean to Decolonize Design, also echoes the same sentiment. The authority of the canon has undermined the work produced by non-Western cultures and those from poorer backgrounds, so that Ghanaian textiles, for example, get cast as craft rather than design. Classifying traditional craft as different from modern design deems the histories and practices of design from many cultures inferior. So we should aim to recognize all culturally important forms of making, to recognize all artifacts, beliefs, assumptions as culturally of equal importance and status, be it others or our own cultures. Now that we have this respect as the starting point, in order to efficiently work in multicultural environment, we also need to be able to cultivate a body of knowledge for the particular cultures that we're interacting with or designed for. What are the norms? What are the behaviors in different situations that may arise at work? So we need curiosity or a deep sense of interest in another human being, in other cultures, a learning mindset. There's so many materials out there to learn about different cultures, so I'll go through just a few of them here today. So Hofstede developed the cultural dimension models that classify cultures by their differences mapped onto multiple dimensions, like high versus low power distance or individualism versus collectivism. But more recently, Dr. Erin Mayer, who's an American author and professor at INSEAD Business School, developed the cultural map tool where you can, similar to Hofstede's, map and compare the tendencies of different countries against several key dimensions. This culture map tool to me provides some more practical and applicable dimensions to everyday's work situation as compared to, say, Hofstede's more abstract dimensions. The typical dimensions she developed are communicating, evaluating, leading, deciding, trusting, disagreeing, and scheduling. Here, I've mapped the different countries where my last team members came from, and as you can see, they all fall into different places on the spectrums. What this means is that it gives us an overview of the areas we can look into, discuss, and agree on what's the most suitable way for the team to work together effectively. You can see on the map that there are some similarities between Singapore, Vietnam, and the Philippines regarding the leading dimension, which has a more hierarchical relationship between boss and subordinates, whereas Ireland has a fairly egalitarian approach. My boss at the time was Irish and happened to follow that egalitarian approach to leading, hence shifting us further away from the hierarchical structure. It's important, again, to note that this isn't absolute. It's more important to be aware of whether your team members might fall on the right or left of you, and where you as a team might have the most stark differences in ways of working to discuss, clarify a shared work culture, or to even adapt your working style to. Another example of yet another team that I was embedded in as a product manager, funny enough, for a brief period of time. The team was based in Vietnam and I was based in Singapore. The team was going through a tough time in the beginning to gel with the new engineering lead and with trusting me, who was not only new, but also was at the time only an interim product manager. It was also tougher for this distributed team given the virtual environment, the fact that we only communicated when we had something work related to discuss. So I decided to fly back to our office in Ho Chi Minh City, met with the people in real life. It was only then that I had a chance to get to know people personally, as well as had a chance to chat with them in person. And our conversations covered not just work related topics, but also our family, our aspirations. After that, we scheduled for team lunches where they could head out and get to know the new engineering lead better. And I would fly back a couple of days every 1 month and a half. Our virtual meetings became less robotic, more lively. People started to raise their opinions and contributed more often. So establishing a relationship, even though it takes time, worked as a way to build trust with my team members. In a completely different team with a manager from Canada who's worked in environment where trust is built through business related activities, the quickest way for me to build trust with them was working together on projects and delivering results. And I'm not saying one way is better than the other, they are simply just different. So apart from the culture map, we also have the Edgar Schein's onion model as seen earlier. Instead of judging a culture just by its artifacts or physical environment, we need genuine and open curiosity so as to peel the layers of the onions to dig deeper and understand what the cultural values are and where they came from to avoid developing sophisticated stereotypes. As mentioned earlier in one of the talk by, I think, Karambari Sahu, for example, to say all Singaporeans behave a certain way or all Vietnamese behave a certain way, and that's simply not true. A good way of keeping an open mind and avoiding stereotypes is by diversifying and being inclusive in our research and our learning. So this is where the inclusive mindsets come in. We need to be inclusive in both our research and our ways of working and designing. Apart from this sort of outsider models of researching on culture, which often aim to find universal ways to classify cultures, this is often called addict research, we also need to look at the insider's perspectives, which is called amic research. Amic research basically means an insider's perspective. It focuses on what members of a certain group feels important to them from the inside, as opposed to addict research, which focuses on what the outsider researchers deem important. So here are some books that I really enjoyed that talk about Singapore's politics as well as social issues that highlight a lot of the underlying assumptions and behaviors and resulting artifacts in Singaporean culture, for example. And of course, the best way to learn about your teammates is always to talk to them and get to know them as individuals. You can't find these insights just looking at the culture map. Research aside, I think we also need to think about how to be inclusive in the way we work. In another company, we ran some research projects on how to enter the Indonesian market, as we've just wrapped up a design for the Singaporean market. The company insisted on simplifying and moving fast, breaking things, using the same system that we built for Singapore, which is a largely English speaking developed country as compared to other countries around the region. Our team member, who is Indonesian, and our distributed team in Indonesia raised concerns over differences in access to certain institutions, access to certain devices, and internet, which we unfortunately deprioritize over the sake of being lean and mean. The project inevitably failed despite having team members embedded with local knowledge in the company and members of the design team from their respective country. So having diversity or a branch of your company located in different regions isn't enough. We must include people in our process. We need to listen to people when we do include them and let people make decisions for their own communities. And importantly, we also need to give them the credit they deserve. And I think that's the difference between diversity and inclusivity. Sid Harrell talks about the tendency of technologists, us, to consider ourselves experts and ignoring the insights of public servants, but I think this is applicable to in multicultural environments too. There's inherently nothing wrong with being an expert designer or engineer, but just as there are experts in technology, there are experts in science, in politics, in sociology, and in this case, in local cultures and insights too. The next mindset that I think would help us thrive in a multicultural environment is, of course, flexibility and adaptability. We need to be able to adapt to new people and environments, but of course, not at the expense of losing ourselves, or as Julia Middleton in her talk on cultural intelligence termed, our core. According to Julia, we have our core, which is what makes us us, our behaviors, our beliefs, so crucial that we aren't able to be flexible about them. And then the rest is our flex. It looks something like this. As we meet more people and move through life, the line moves just ever so carefully. Something like my Vietnamese identity used to belong to the flex zone. I used to not concern myself with my own culture, but now I do. And it is really important to me now that I preserve and contribute to the culture that I was born into. Different people in different cultures have different cores and different flexes. When we interact with people, we can learn to be flexible about things that do not interfere with who we are as a person. But when we interact with people, our flex and core will also change. Something as simple as organizing a team lunch, for example. Um, in certain cultures, folks don't eat pork or beef or meat at all, and it is up to us to exercise our flex to be as inclusive as possible in this circumstance because it is somebody else's core. But of course, inevitably, there'll be times, and many, many, many times, we are going to make mistakes. And I think when we do, this is a brilliant illustration that really describes what comes after. This is done by poorly drawn lines. Of course, there is shame, there's guilt, and a whole lot of self reflection. But making mistakes is a part of learning. And this leads me to the last mindset to have working in multicultural teams: humility. Life is busy and the world is vast, and what we see on mainstream media isn't exactly teaching us all that much about the real world. So we will make mistakes, and often. I sure hope that I will not make the same mistakes over and over and over again. But when I do fail, and when we do fail, I hope we are prepared to apologize freely and that we'll have the humility to ask questions, to own up to our own mistakes, and to make the effort to rectify, and to not fear that we have made a fool of ourselves. In Vietnamese, we have another saying that also has something to do with eating, học ăn, học nói, học gói, học mở, which roughly translates to learn how to eat, how to speak, how to wrap something, how to open it, so we can behave in a good way. Meaning we need to start small, but with the fundamentals of being to learn how to become a cultured person. So to thrive in teams without borders and become a multicultural person, I think having the right mindsets is fundamental to start. It starts with respect, with curiosity, inclusivity, a willingness to adapt, humbleness and humility, and to apologize and to learn. And all the while, we can also celebrate all that we are, all a part of this weird, odd, multicultural tiny dot in the universe. Because in order to face seemingly insurmountable challenges in the future, I think it will require all of us, regardless of where we are from, to work together. Thank you.
Whoa, that was fantastic.
Thank you.
It was a really nice presentation. Uh, Thanks, Zoe. So we will take questions now, people. We do have one here. Uh, so Majura is asking, what's been your experience in talking unconscious bias?
Um, I think a lot of the stuff that I've been talking about in the talk are learned in hindsight, which means that I've made kind of a lot of extremely awful mistakes before I could arrive at this point where I say, oh, I need to kind of learn how to, you know, be more curious and learn all of these things about different cultures. In terms of unconscious bias, I think being there's a point that I was talking about, which is being inclusive. I think when you're in environments with people who have vastly different opinions and vastly different experiences, being able to have that inclusive environment and people being able to share their thoughts and ideas, you will be exposed to the biases of yourself. You'll be you'll listen to someone else sharing their experience and you're like, oh, I absolutely did not think about that. And I think that's what we need to do. We need to, be open to other people's opinions and be inclusive in our ways of working in order to tackle our own unconscious bias.
Okay, nice. Uh, another another question: how do you deal with incivility in teams? From James.
Mm. Uh, Let me rephrase this question. So I'm understanding it as like hostility in a multicultural team.
Incivility.
So people are uncivil to each other, like they're rude
Yes, yes,
and yeah.
yes.
Um, so I'm very lucky. I don't think that I have experienced a lot of aggression in the multicultural team. I think a lot of the people that I've worked with, again, comes from a place of respect when it comes to other people and other culture. But I think when we do come across uh, people who are hostile or situations that are uncomfortable, um, I think having conversations and like there's a book called Crucial Conversations that talks about this, basically having conversations and finding, common ground. A lot of the time when there's conflicts or miscommunication, it's often because you misunderstand something or you work on different assumptions. And being able to have open communication about it, and especially finding that common ground. I don't think people go to work with the intention to sabotage other people or to be aggressive. So I think being able to, find that shared meaning to find that common ground to work on together is important.
Okay. We have one more. Is could you talk a bit more about how you have pushed back on the lean brick things fast culture respectfully?
Yeah. So I think it's about pushing back on sort of working fast and breaking things in the process. So I told us that story previously, right? And the ending of that story was that we actually failed to do that. But I think having I have to give credit to the team that worked on that. I think the team has done a lot of research on that, and also sharing a lot of insights and then doing a lot of buy-ins with the stakeholders in order to kind of convince people of what's the right thing to do for your user and what's the right thing to do for the communities that you were working with. I think yeah, I think that's what we need to do. And unfortunately, it didn't work out for us. But I think just being persistent and being resilient in, advocating for your user, advocating for the right way to do things in your company. Yeah.
Okay. One last question. I will try to combine both in one. First of all, is why use "Have you eaten" as a title? Secondly, is like being a Vietnamese and living in Singapore might make you lose and gain a bit of both worlds. How do you see yourself now?
That's actually a really interesting question. I use "Have you eaten" because I wanted to. I was thinking about how to write like a greeting for the talk, and I was like, and then I had a call with my mom, and that's like the first question that she asked me, and I was like, oh, I could use that because that's something that only my mom asked me. Like nobody asked me that over here. Um, yeah, and I think wanted to introduce a little bit about my culture, and I think starting with a greeting is the easiest way to do that. So in regards to the second half of the question, which is in regards to being a Vietnamese working in Singapore, what have I gained and what have I lost? Um, I really enjoyed working in international environment. Like there are so many opportunities to learn new things, to be exposed to different cultures, to also again like to challenge my unconscious bias. There's so many things that I didn't know until I am embedded in this environment. Um, but at the same time, I think I've spent 13 years living in Singapore, and especially this year uh, with COVID, I am not able to fly back, and I'm really desperate for some Vietnamese food and to just be in my city right now. Um, a lot of I think I've lost touch with a lot of the sort of everyday thing that you would experience when you live in a place, things that are very, very normal, but are so distinct in different places. Like I miss the sound of the street. I miss the smell of the building of the house that I live in, and I miss the seasons. We don't have season in Singapore, and we have seasons in Vietnam, I miss that a lot. But I think another thing that I've lost was really immersing myself into my own culture, to be able to wake up and go out into the street to experience life there, to learn about the smallest shift in changes over there. I mean, I have a brother, and like since I've lived away for so long, I can't experience like, him growing up as well. But then I think the same thing happened with Vietnamese culture. I can experience what the changes is like from before and now. Um, and I think not being able to, you know, immerse in that culture, not be able to think about how I can contribute to that culture, or how I can find things unique about my culture to bring to the international stage, is something that I feel like I've missed out. And I'm trying really hard to get back into it, but I'm still at the beginning of it. Yeah, hopefully. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic! Seems like your presentation created like a lot of reactions here. Like a lot of people saying it's a lovely presentation, thought provoking. So seems like you delivered a really well done job here. So
Thank
congrats.
you so much. You're very kind. Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
So okay, so we're not gonna be taking more questions because we run out of time. So thank you, Zoe, for your presentation, and ho- hopefully talk to you soon. For the people who want to watch this talk again, it's gonna be available in a few minutes from now. So see you in the next talk. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.